Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. Today's episode is about the creative reuse of large plastic tubs, like the kind that you would use for laundry detergent or for cooking oil. These are made from extremely sturdy, thick plastic with lids that screw on very tightly, and they are mostly made from type 2 plastic or HDPE or high-density polyethylene. So let's start with some easy ideas that you can do at home, and then I'm going to move on to some more crafty ideas, and then we'll finally end with some really incredible projects that are being done by artists around the world. But first, let's just make it clear that it would be great if we could all stop purchasing products that are made with this type of tub. It is rarely possible to recycle it in municipal recycling programs. Now, there is a trend, very good trend, of zero waste stores where they offer these types of products, laundry, soap, oil, or other heavy liquid products in bulk where you could refill your own container. Now, this has always been the case as long as I've remembered, but it can be difficult to find these stores. So I am really grateful that more and more small business owners are opening these types of zero waste stores, and I hope you will support them if they're in your community. So now let's talk about what you could do with these containers at home. These are relatively easy projects that you can do, and you can see pictures of all these projects on the Trashmagination Pinterest board, which I will link in the show notes. Well, let's first consider that these tubs are designed to hold liquid, and so they make great storage containers for items such as leftover paint. And some of them have a little spout that you can set up in your laundry room and just pour out the amount of laundry soap you need. And that makes it a really great hand washing station that you could take with you to outdoor activities. Obviously, after the laundry soap is empty and you just put in some nice hand soap and water. So, for example, as a scout leader, one of the activities that we often do with the scouts is they use knots to lash together sticks to make a hand washing station. And these little laundry tubs can be a great addition to that activity. Or if you're having a bubble party outside, maybe in the summer or at a birthday party, you could make it a bubble liquid refill station. You can also drill holes in the lid of some of these containers so that it would make it into a great watering can for your plants. And then these containers are also great at storing substances that maybe come in a plastic bag, but once you open the plastic bag, now it tends to spill. So for example, I'm thinking about organic gardening supplies or ice melting crystals or sand. Another great use for these tubs is to fill them with water or sand and use them as weights. So you could use them as weights in your exercise routine, or you could use them to help weigh something down like a tent or a tarp on a windy day. Now, if you cut off the top section of these containers but leave the handle on, then it can become a really useful scoop or bucket. And you could bring it to the beach instead of buying a new plastic bucket, or you could use them to scoop for anything like feed for animals. And you could also use them in a game where you could toss a small ball back and forth from scoop to scoop. So now let's talk about ideas for reusing them that are more about crafts. So one creative reuse idea is to make a geocache. And if you're not familiar with geocaching, it's like a worldwide scavenger hunt. When my kids were between the ages of about 5 and 10, we did a lot of this. We were always looking for geocaches. And so the way it works is people put little toys or other fun things in them, and then they put the latitude and longitude of their location up on a website called geocaching.com. So it's all free, and it's great because it helps you start thinking there's like magical little treasure boxes everywhere in the world. And there is also a Scout Merit Badge for geocaching. And a really great way of making a geocache is with a Tide Pod laundry tub because they are waterproof and they come with an easy to open lid. So more about those Tide Pod containers. They are generally round and they come in orange, yellow, and white. And so I've seen people reuse them to make lots of different holiday decorations. So for example, an orange one would make a great pumpkin, and you can either use stickers to put the facial features of the pumpkin, or you could use a craft knife to let some light shine through. But I did see people saying, please don't use them to hand out Halloween candy because we don't want kids to associate Tide Pod containers with candy. The white ones make great snowman heads, or you can add bunny ears to make it into a bunny head. And then I also saw a situation where people took 3 of those white ones and stacked them one on top of each other to make a snowman decoration. And finally, the yellow Tide Pod containers make great emoji faces or Lego heads. Another type of craft to make with laundry tubs are masks. So I saw one artist who did a project which he called Tiki Statues, where he made a series of masks that would stand on top of each other from these plastic jugs. Now, he was using coffee containers, which have a similar kind of dense plastic. And then other artists make lots of different kinds of masks using plastic jugs because the hole where the liquid pours out looks like the hole like a mouth in the shape of an O, and the handle makes a really great nose. And so you just need to add eyes or hair or wherever else you want to add to your mask. So next I want to talk about crafts that involve manipulating the plastic jugs a bit more than just sticking stuff onto them, where you're going to need to cut them or melt them or rivet them together. So as you can imagine, this is not easy with these containers because they are very thick plastic. I mean, they are designed to be very strong to make sure that the liquids do not spill. And there is some variety in the thickness of the plastic, so some are easier to cut than others. And I mean, I'm going to link to a tutorial that shows somebody has taken one of these jugs that we use for carrying cooking oil, and they were able to cut it in a way so that it made it into an elephant. And the way they did that is the handle on the side of the jug formed the elephant's trunk. But this craft is only possible really if you have really good scissors and also if you have a laundry container that is relatively straightforward to cut. Some of them are too hard to do this craft. Now, many years ago, I attended an Earth Day festival where I purchased a bracelet. And if you looked at the little tiny discs on the bracelet, it was clear that they were made by cutting into laundry tubs and gift cards. So I asked the artist how she made it, and she said she used punches, kind of like how you use to cut leather, and she would punch out little plastic circles, and then she would drill a small hole in each circle, and then add an O-ring and attach them to the bracelet. And the result looks like kind of like a charm bracelet, but where all the charms are made from colorful plastic circles. So I will post photos of the bracelet, which I still have, and I think it's really cool. Unfortunately, I lost the name of the artist, and I've looked and looked. I cannot find it. Maybe she doesn't do it anymore. But anyways, I tried to replicate her technique. I got some leather punches, but I could not consistently get a nice circle from cutting laundry tubs. Now, I'm guessing either her punches were much nicer or she persisted in perfecting her technique longer than I did. Anyway, I gave up on that idea. And so I have actually had more luck with other techniques that I learned from a book called Fantastic Recycled Plastic by David and Robin Edgar. Now, David Edgar, he had been sculpting with steel for many decades when he decided he would start experimenting with plastic tubs. And most of his designs are inspired by fish. So he started a series which he called Plastiquarium. And he has shared tutorials for how to make his fish shapes in this book. And also I found one on YouTube, which I will link to. So some of the key points in David's book were that a great way to manipulate these thick plastic tubs is to use a heat gun. I don't own a heat gun, but I could see that would be very helpful. It looks like a drill, but it blows really hot air out of one end. So it's obviously not a tool you would use with children, but it would work really well with this thick kind of plastic to either soften it or melt it. Another important point about making items from plastic tubs is that I wouldn't rely on glue to make your items because that won't hold very long over time. And so David, in his book, he talks about using metal rivets rather than glue. You can also use a drill to drill holes, and then you could connect components with metal wire or rope. So Aurora Robson is an artist I've mentioned many times before in my podcast because I'm such a huge fan. And many of her sculptures use techniques similar to what David Edgar talks about in his book, where she uses metal rivets to hold her pieces together. I mean, there's lots of videos about her work on YouTube, but I'm going to share one in the show notes of this show where she talks about making one of my favorite sculptures called Camilo, and she did this in Hawaii with plastic that she picked up from the beaches. And she tied parts of her sculpture together with fishing rope that she recovered on the beach, and she built the armature for the sculpture from plastic crates that had washed ashore. But many, many of the pieces in the sculpture are these thick plastic tubs like we've been describing. Another artist inspired by the plastic that washes up on the beaches of Hawaii is Crabill, and she is with Nurdle in the Rough Jewelry. So what is a nurdle? A nurdle is a tiny nugget of plastic. So typically when a company makes plastic, it buys a whole bunch of nurdles that gets shipped to them overseas on a big boat. And then the problem is that occasionally a container of these nurdles falls off the boat and goes into the ocean, and the ocean now is filled with these little nurdles. And when they wash up on the beach, the problem is that a nurdle looks a whole lot like a pebble. And so you can have a beach where there's just tons and tons of these things, and it's extremely difficult to clean them. And even worse, they look like fish eggs. So many creatures eat them. So anyways, that is the name of her company, Nurdle in the Rough. But Kat has invented a really cool way of creatively reusing these heavy plastic tubs. So she is a metalsmith. And what she does is she makes the base of jewelry pieces with these metals, and then she cuts and buffs the plastic from these plastic jugs so they look like gemstones. And you have to see a video of her technique. It's quite amazing. So these plastics maybe have spent years or decades at sea. They're covered in so many lines from their long journey. But somehow using this technique that she's come up with, she's able to make them look like really beautiful gemstones. You would never think that this was made from an old plastic tub. The last artist I'll mention who works with plastic tubs is Serge Attukwei Clottey. So Serge is from Ghana, and his work is about the migration of people and objects. Serge does many types of art, but his most famous signature technique is to cut up thick plastic tubs. He cuts them into squares, and then he drills holes in them, and he connects them with wires into these enormous tapestries. These tubs are imported from Europe, and they contain cooking oil. But once the cooking oil is used up, people use them to carry water and even gasoline. And they are really essential for life during times of scarcity. So these are called gallons in Ghana, and since his work focuses on using these gallons, Serge invented the term Afro-gallonism, which he defines as an artistic concept to explore the relationship between the prevalence of the yellow oil gallons in regards to consumption and necessity in the life of the modern African. So most of these tubs are bright yellow. And the yellow plastic squares in his tapestries, they have great variation of color depending on what has happened to that plastic tub. Serge tackles many political topics with his artwork. For example, he wanted to address questions of gender roles after his mother died. So in his tribe's tradition, once someone's mother has passed away, her possessions would go to her daughters 1 year after her death. So Serge was his mother's only child, and he challenged the tradition and asked to receive her items. So he and his team of artists, they wear women's clothing now when they collect materials to encourage this conversation about gender roles. And in another performance piece, Serge wanted to make a statement about land ownership in his community. So his family was promised a certain area of land many generations ago, but unfortunately there's no legal documentation about it. And in one of his performances, his team took his giant yellow tapestries made from these plastic gallons, and they spread them all around the area where his family lives, covering all the roads and even up the sides of the buildings to delineate that this was the area where his family felt that they should own the land. And the tapestries are really enormous, as I said, enough to cover a massive area in his community. And when they're laying on the road between the buildings, they look like a yellow brick road. And the tapestries are strong enough that people can actually walk on them. So Serge has taken this material and made it part of his community's culture, and now his work is being purchased and displayed all around the world, such as a very huge tapestry at the Facebook headquarters. Thank you for listening. I'll remind you that my Fluffy Rug course for recycling t-shirts is still available on my website. I would love to see you taking that course. And some of my fluffy rugs are also now available for sale on my website, which is trashmagination.com. Until next time, may you see plastic tubs as a source of art in your life.